It wasn't quite meant to be like this. Last November, Digital Foundry visited Valve in Bellevue, Washington to take a look at 3 promising pieces of hardware. The console-like Steam Machine, Valve's next-gen ARM-powered VR headset Steam Frame, and kind of tying them both together, a brand new Steam controller. And we left impressed, looking forward to a Q1 2026 release, but the AI-fueled memory crisis changed everything. Of the triumvirate of devices, only one has a firm release, the Steam controller. Perhaps not surprising, bearing in mind it doesn't actually need any RAM as such, but priced at $99 USD or 85 of our English pound sterling. It'll be available to buy on May the 4th. Valve sent out a number of samples for review, and we were lucky enough to get a couple. And Oliver Mackenzie here has been putting in the hours on the new controller. So, Oliver, first of all, hello. And secondly, well, Steam controller, here we are. Why don't you take it from the top?
Yes, Rich, this is an exciting product, I would say. Maybe a little bit less exciting than perhaps the Steam Machine or Steam Frame, which, like you said, we're kind of aligned in the same review, in the same release window, but it's not to be. And we've just had this Steam controller. Obviously, the other 2 devices are slated, hopefully, for the first half of this year. That was our last communication on the subject, but we'll have to see on that one. So yeah, the Steam controller, you open up the box here. It's got a very simple arrangement. It comes with the controller, a Type A USB to USB-C cable. And there's no USB-C to USB-C cable here. And you get a wireless 2.4 gigahertz controller puck, which also charges the controller. So the idea is that you basically connect the puck to your computer with the included cable, then the controller connects instantly to your computer for use, or you can use Bluetooth if you prefer, but I think the quality, stability of that connection over the included 2.4 gigahertz wireless controller puck, it should be a lot better, I think, than Bluetooth, especially if Bluetooth is congested with multiple controllers or multiple devices over your radio. In layout terms, it's a lot like a Steam Deck. So it's like a pretty standardish layout for the most part, with D-pad, face buttons, shoulder buttons, triggers, back buttons. But the arrangements on the sticks is a bit odd, with sticks that are inset somewhat symmetrically, with positioning that's kind of similar to a PS4 controller, I would say, but a bit higher up. They are TMR sticks, which uses magnetic sensing, like instead of a potentiometer, kind of like a Hall effect stick, and is reputed to be fairly low power, so you should get pretty good battery life off this device. Towards the bottom, there are 2 trackpads, which are kind of tilted towards your thumbs and have haptic feedback. So as you glide your thumbs across them, they click. They have this very cool haptic feedback, which really helps you guide the placement of your fingers over those trackpads, which I think is kind of cool. Even though it's not like a light controller, the fact that it's so large and not too dense makes it feel lighter than it is, I think. And it's angled and has a more ergonomic feel than I think a Steam Deck would in typical play. In terms of the feel of the buttons, I think Valve has gone more for a membrane actuation over clicky actuation for most of the buttons, which is more typical of like the Sony approach, I would say, than the Microsoft approach. So the face buttons, D-pads, shoulder buttons have a quiet and kind of clacky actuation as opposed to a clicky actuation. The triggers have a pretty long throw, but no trigger haptics here, so no resistance triggers, no vibration triggers like we see in the Xbox. And on the back, there are 4 back buttons, which have a kind of clicky actuation, but with a fair bit of travel, I would say. So not quite a soft actuation, but also not like a super sharp, short, clicky actuation either. Overall, I like the design of the controller, and I think it has a very good construction. But obviously, like, the way that it's been laid out is interesting. It's really designed to accommodate PC titles, I would say. And that was certainly my impression after speaking to a couple of Valve employees who worked on the project. So it's not going to be necessarily to everyone's immediate tastes, but I think you can see where they made the choices, why they made the choices they made on this controller, and how it kind of all comes together to make sense in much the same way that the Steam Deck controller came together and made sense. And this device is like explicitly patterned after that Steam Deck rather. It's not patterned after the initial Steam controller that we saw back, I think, in 2015, which had a radically different design, very unusual, only 1 stick, no D-pad, all kinds of weird excisions. This is really much more of a kind of standard battle-tested design that we've seen in the Steam Deck for the past 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. The original Steam controller, I just never got on with it. The concept of it was kind of wacky, but there were, plenty of people out there that absolutely loved it and what it did. This time around, they're going for a much more traditional design, but retaining what made that different and unique. And of course, all of that is sort of built from what was delivered on the Steam Deck as well. But, this is going to be a tricky one because controllers are a very, very personal thing, right? And specifically when you're dealing with something like the Xbox controller, which, has been like a staple, a standard, if you like, over so many years. For me specifically, I mean, I enjoyed the DualSense, but I went back to the Xbox controller. I went back to the Xbox Series controller. And I think that is kind of like the pinnacle for me. And I think it is still, even with this new Steam controller, it's really difficult to actually move on to something different and exciting and new when the old and tried and trusted controller has just been such a good servant over the years. But let's get into it. Let's talk about the features, because I think it's fair to say that on the features side of things, this one is definitely a cut above those existing controllers. And there's a lot to dig into here.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. So my immediate impressions from this controller were very positive because there's no like setup process. You just plug the puck into your computer and it works perfectly, like out of the box. You just hit that Steam button in the controller, plug it into your computer, and you get that like perfect pairing experience already. I would say that in Steam, games generally load with a profile that works just fine for the Steam controller, and you can rely on community profiles if you like for the Steam Deck because the two basically share a layout. They are interoperable as far as I can see, so you get that community support out of the box as well, which is quite nice. Loading up games on Steam is quite seamless, so I played through a bunch of games in my library, including like a ton of racing games, Doom the Dark Ages, GTA 5, Cyberpunk, a bunch of different games. And for those games, it seems to work fine enough. Those are obviously games that are designed around traditional like Xbox pads, PlayStation pads. They work just fine here. There are some excisions that I'm not the biggest fan of, though, like it does lack vibration triggers, which I do like in my racing games, and it does have more precise haptic motor for the trackpads, but the rumble sensation in games is, as far as I understand it from speaking to several Valve employees, is generally mapped from Xbox rumble input and isn't especially precise. So you're basically getting that like Xbox input rumble. It's not like the fine waveform rumble that you might get on a PlayStation 5 DualSense controller, right? They're looking into expanding that functionality potentially, but at the moment it is that kind of coarser rumble. But I would say that again, the layout isn't my favorite necessarily for these kinds of games, and everyone will have their own proclivities and sensitivities here, but I do find the Xbox pad a bit more comfortable in terms of its asymmetric stick layout in particular, and even the DualSense I find a little bit more comfortable for these games, but obviously that's going to differ depending on the person. But the one area where I think this controller is like so good, and so good possibly that it's almost revolutionary for the couch PC gaming experience, is for games that you would not traditionally play with a controller or consider ever. Like World of Warcraft, which is a game that I've been playing for, 22 years now, quite a while, on and off. But that game, if you have a controller add-on for it, like console port, right, which transforms the interface into a controller-friendly interface, most controllers work great, except for when you need cursor input, right? Because the game it's still designed around a mouse cursor. You still need that mouse cursor input. But this controller just perfectly has these trackpads, which are just right under the sticks, feel perfect, have that haptic feedback, and you can use these trackpads and get that cursor input in your game that's so valuable for these titles. So up until this point, the best solution for those titles, in my opinion, has been like a PS4 or PS5 controller, because obviously you have that trackpad at the top, but this is so much better. This is so much better because instead of just this kind of large trackpad at the top of the device, you actually have trackpads that are positioned where your fingers naturally rest, and they have that nice haptic feedback. So it's just perfect. It's just like the Steam Deck. It feels fantastic, I would say. And I felt totally comfortable questing or doing casual content with this controller, and I feel like for higher end content, you could probably get used to it. At least I have with the Steam controller, or rather with the Steam Deck. So I imagine this should be pretty good as well. And the trackpads are also great for navigating websites and the desktop when you aren't gaming. And indeed, the Valve employees I spoke to talked very favorably of this kind of arrangement and suggested, hey, maybe this is actually very important if you're shipping a console as PC-like device, like we know the next generation Project Helix is probably going to ship with a controller. Who knows what that will look like, but I would suggest to Microsoft that actually having a good facsimile of a trackpad input, at least, is very important for a lot of these PC games and their launchers and needing to dip back into Windows and all this stuff. This controller handles it pretty well. But now the big negative for a lot of people with this controller, or potentially a substantial negative, is that the name is a Steam controller, right? It is a Steam controller.
Yeah.
So for games in Windows, it basically is mapped as a keypad, keyboard, trackpad kind of deal. It's good for navigating Windows, but it's not actually good for playing games. So to get games running, you really have to have games residing in Steam. Obviously, you can add non-Steam games to Steam. That's going to work for 99% of games, I suspect, but there are going to be some outliers like maybe UWP games that aren't going to work so well with that. So that's something to consider. And Valve suggested here their whole reasoning behind that is because if they exposed it as an X input controller in Windows, you wouldn't really be able to use the trackpads or the back buttons or any of those things, right? Because X input basically treats every pad as if it's a 360 pad. So that would not work out so well. At least that's as far as my understanding goes. But within Steam, you get really easy controller customization. You have the ability to configure gyro if you want, as I did in Spyro here, to control the camera. You can use grip sense, which seems to mostly be a feature that allows you to turn off and on gyro as you see fit, because obviously, you have that linear actuation of the sticks, and then you want to move to a more absolute aiming system with the gyro. It's helpful to be able to toggle that on and off, so you're not always triggering the gyro in your games. But yeah, it's all very smooth. The only thing that I would really complain about at this moment, and I think this is something Valve could probably fix, is that when you're within Steam, I wish they made it so you could control the Steam interface with the trackpads, because they turn off the trackpad functionality when you're in Steam. I wish that they would let you control the Steam interface with these trackpads, because some parts of the Steam interface still don't work that well with the controller, including the Steam Store, even in big picture mode. Something to think about. But by and large, this is a really clever, well thought out controller that meets the PC where it is, not where we want it to be, right? It meets the realities of a windowed operating system. It meets the realities of games that are designed without explicit gamepad support. And it kind of gets there through a hardware accommodation instead of through like some extremely elaborate software accommodation. Obviously, there's a software component to this as well. But it's a very clever and keen way to play PC games in a format where we wouldn't normally be able to play PC games, just like the Steam Deck. It's very clever, works very well, and I quite like it for that purpose in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much a Steam controller, right? Mm-hmm. You get the best results with Steam. You get the best results across the sort of diversity of PC titles. What do you think about the price point? $100. There's been a lot of pushback against it. At the same time, though, there isn't really a device like this, and I think there's also like a dedication to quality that goes above and beyond. For example, we had a discussion before we started this conversation about what is this puck actually for? It's like, because I was sitting there playing Pragmata without the puck. So, what is the purpose of the puck? It's like, well, okay, maybe it's for charging, but, it charges itself without the puck using the USB input. So on the one hand, that's sort of like a bit mystifying, that I needed a quick Q&A session to get to the bottom of it, which is essentially that you have a higher quality, lower latency wireless connection with the puck. And it basically beats the results you'd get from Bluetooth, where there may be a lot of sort of Wi-Fi traffic causing problems there. But it's kind of like just goes to show the sort of level of detail and attention to the quality of the experience that they've put into this. So that, combined with the fact that it is designed to basically operate across the length and breadth of PC experiences, kind of like says to me that it's we've heard of pro controllers before, right? But this is actually more of a pro controller designed specifically to the PC user and those the wide range of titles across Steam on there. So I'm not actually too concerned about the price point as such, because there's so much in there. But at the same time, if you are just going to use it as a standard controller, as you would use your current Xbox controller, for example, there is a pretty strong argument that maybe you don't need this. And, as I said earlier, there's the sense that you're so sort of, the muscle memory is attached to that one specific controller that you've been using for years, that sometimes things feel a bit weird. First picking up the Steam controller, for example, there's the sense that the sticks are a bit too inset And that they're not actually uncomfortable as such. It's just that I'm used to Xbox.
Right.
And something that was a bit more unfortunate is that, I actually found myself in gameplay just pressing the back buttons just because I'm used to putting a certain amount of pressure on the Xbox controller. And when you do it here, it presses the buttons. Now, they're disabled by default, so it doesn't really make a difference. But, there's going to be a certain level of a certain acclimatization period to get used to this, right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And I think for a lot of users, there's going to be a good case to make. But the controller you have is maybe the best controller or a good controller for your own purposes. I mean, virtually everyone on PC, I imagine, has some kind of gamepad for at least some kind of games they play. Whether that's a console OEM pad, like an Xbox pad, a PlayStation pad, a Nintendo pad, or whether that's a third-party controller. I think a lot of people will have a controller they can probably reasonably stick with, and they're probably quite comfortable with, as you suggested. But I think that this controller really, you really have to be able to take use of it for its unique capabilities, right? It is a really good general purpose PC controller for all kinds of things, for console software, for PC software, etc. And if you have a kind of specialty PC use case in mind, like if you want to play Factorio, if you want to play Balatro with the trackpads, if you want to play World of Warcraft, if you want to play all these different kinds of games, I feel like there's probably nothing else better than this. Maybe with some modding, maybe some modification, maybe some changes to the game, where the game works with Steam input. I think you can get a really, really good experience here. But obviously it is more expensive than competing designs. It's, $20, $30, $40 more than a lot of competing controllers that are out there in the market. So you do need to find utility in its ability to navigate windowed operating systems, in its ability to use games that you wouldn't normally expect to play with a controller. You need to find utility in that. If you don't find utility in that, I'm very tempted to just say get an Xbox pad, in my opinion, because that's a very safe recommendation for most users. But yeah, for me, World of Warcraft, great use case there. I could imagine a use case with several other games that I play as well, other MMOs, games like that. But for general purpose, I'd probably still gravitate towards an Xbox pad in most cases. I still have an interest in the controller. I think it's very cool. But for me, it settles, my own personal use would really be in these specific games. Then maybe for other games, I may maybe go to different controllers. So maybe I don't. Maybe I just stick with this one because I'm lazy. But perhaps I would go to a different controller for that. In terms of the technical specifics in this controller, I mean, you can connect 4 controllers per puck, or up to 16 controllers with 4 pucks, I think. It pulls at 250 hertz, which is pretty good. Not like pro controller level, but pretty good. So yeah, I think that this in general, quite a good controller. Now, there are some things that are missing from it. I would point out, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, like it doesn't have a headphone jack, right? It does not have a 3.5mm headphone jack, so you can't just connect audio into this controller. You'll need to have some kind of like Bluetooth headset or something, some wired headset that might be feeding into your computer. And also, if you're looking for something that's truly a pro controller, like this has some pro controller functionalities. It obviously has the back buttons. It has, the trackpads, which are interesting and unique, but it doesn't have trigger stops, doesn't have swappable sticks, doesn't have some of those higher end like Xbox Elite controller functionalities, or the higher end PlayStation controller functionalities that we're used to seeing out of these really high end devices. This is positioned below those devices in terms of pricing, but it's important to emphasize this is like, it's almost more like the Nintendo Switch quote unquote pro controller, right? Than those higher
that was
end.
A great controller.
It is a great controller. And like the Nintendo Switch pro controller, I think this is a really high quality device. I think it's a very well built controller, but also for this device in particular, it is a bit off the beaten path, and I think you do need to find a reason to use it above other controllers.
Yeah, I also think they deserve kudos for the repairability factor. It's easy to get into. It has got an internal battery, but it is easily replaceable as well. So, these are sort of, they've sort of headed off at the pass some of the problems we've had with controllers, with like integrated batteries, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's quite admirable for sure. I think it's just like 6 or 7 Torx screws out, and then immediately you can just access the battery, which I think connects with contacts. It's not like hot swappable as such, but they did put a lot of thinking behind this controller, and they did make all the parts that are likely to fail swappable. I know they didn't make the stick swappable, but you'd presume those would be pretty indestructible over time given their DMR technology. So hopefully you never have to swap them out.
Okay, good stuff. Well, it's somewhat of a shame that we don't have the other two elements in the three-way lineup of Valve hardware to take a look at, but hopefully that will be arriving soon. But in the meantime, this is certainly a really interesting device, and plenty to discuss and plenty to talk about on there, and I hope it does well for them. But I guess that's all from us on this one, so please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed the review. Ring bells for notifications. DF supporter program, patreon.com/Digital Foundry. Tons of great stuff there. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.